I was framed in many situations when I was younger that the result of X was because of Y and you are the Y. I tend to put people before myself. So I'm concerned and catering to their needs above my own. And because I cater to their needs, it's often at my expense. 5 years, 15 years, 20, 30, 50 years from now, 150 years from now, there is a very clear understanding of who you are and what you represent.
As a society, how would you define our priorities?
It's a really difficult question because
Alagroobi is an artist, author, podcaster, and so many other great things. In this episode, we discussed about her book, Fire and Silk. We also spoke about her research, which examined health Emiratis in UAE and as well as the region. We also spoke about her opinion on Western femininity. All right, before we kick off with this episode, if you can subscribe to this channel, it will help me bring you more and more high performers to this show. This is the High Performance Mindset, and today's guest is Alagroobi. Enjoy this episode. Sarah, we as Arabs have different ways of expressing through art. We're expressing different topics. But when it comes to music, it's constantly repetitive in terms of the topic. It's always حب وغرام or أحبك يا بلادي, which will be a song for عيد الوطن يعني. Why is that? Why is it like, why don't we sing about anything else? Why is it always the same thing? Like when it comes to other forms of art, you see different expressions. But when it comes to music, it's constantly the same.
I don't know. I think with music, we try to follow certain patterns and expectations of society. And the one thing that is universal is love and desire and longing and expecting the unexpected. But I think we have different stages of love. We have unrequited love. We have, love which is without any expectations or like what do they call it? Conditional, unconditional love. And so trying to meet people at a stage where they're going to accept that universality is probably through music, where you can sing about things that people are going to connect with and you're going to resonate with. But there are many other subjects that people talk about, but it's in the nuance, right? So they'll talk about things that are maybe politically enticing or culturally stigmatized, but then they interweave it into songs of ballad where they're like, I love you, I desire you. And
I mean, when it comes to like even the artists that are here that would sing in English, even if they're Arabs, if they would sing in English, they would sing in different topics. But if they're Arabs singing in Arabic, it'll always be حب وغرام. Like, can we change that? Like, can we start talking about issues that are pressing or maybe inspirational topics? Maybe, I feel we need to, that's it. Like, we need to give that a break. Like, we need to switch it up.
But which artists are you referring to? Because, I mean, contemporary artists, rappers like Omar and Nasi, the narcissist, Nasi Yasin. They always talk about things that are deeply entrenched in cultural political topics.
But not in Arabic.
What are you talking about?
Like, if you pick any Khaliji song right now.
I don't really listen to Khaliji music, so I'm like the last person to ask, but yes.
Or Shami songs.
Yeah, I don't really listen to Shami music.
Egyptian music.
Yeah.
What would you expect the topic to be?
Well, as you said, it's like, okay, love, desire, longing. But even when, for example, Arabs sing in general, they'll always kind of sing it from the position of the man loving the woman, even if it's a guy who's singing. Because like the viewer or the person receiving that music is going to be a woman, or it's going to be somebody that's going to express it in that way. So even let's say the framework is also rigid in nature. But I don't really necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think now with people like Omar and other people that are very...
Look, Omar, I love him. He's a brother. He's considered underground. artist. He's not commercial artist. Like when I say he's not commercial, he's not someone that is being aired on the radio. Narcy, same thing.
But I don't think it invalidates their ability to
like
speak
I would
on
love
the
it
truth.
if the artist can start, you can talk about love. You can have an album and talk 5 tracks about love, right? But also talk about other things, because there's other things other than the relationship between a man and a woman. Like we can talk about so many other things. Very few tracks may be about love of the mother. There is, but they're very few. And also always the same thing, just it's always about the country, and it's about حب وغرام. يعني we need to talk about other stuff. Like I really feel we need to switch it up, express
but
different
I feel like
ways.
There's a lot of artists that are already doing that. I think the whole reason why mainstream music,
Like who? Rashid Al-Majid, Al-Majid Abdullah, like it's always love. And that's what sells.
I'm not very well versed in
I don't
musicians.
listen a lot, right? But whenever I listen, like that's it. And I feel that influences the masses. This is why I'm concerned. Because the next thing that I would ask on a large scale as a society, how would you define our priorities?
Well, it's a really difficult question because, first of all, I'm not well versed in Arabic music. That's just not something that I grew up with. So I don't have much knowledge and understanding of what people are considering, mainstream music. I seek to my fellow peers around me, like Yassine, like Omar Effendim, like those people who really do talk about socio-political conversations, talk about tradition, at times intangible heritage, at times the nuances of the fabric of society that people don't have access to. And the whole nature of their game is to be underground in order to bridge bottom up from top down so that we can meet in the middle. So when you make the argument of saying like, okay, well, mainstream artists are very much, following a very specific recipe or a very specific formula that they have to abide by, the whole reason why these people are kind of merging out of the woodworks, as you say, is because they don't conform to these restrictions and these rigid ways of thinking. But I think someone who's more well-versed would be able to speak on that. For me, I'm not the one, but I respect very much their practice. And I feel like with this kind of hybrid understanding of poetry versus hakawat versus, spoken word plus, the interlacing of beats versus I don't even know what, rap, etc. I think that they're really trying to change the way that we are digesting mainstream media, the way that we're digesting socio-political content, the way that we are creating social discourse. It's within the nuances of the words that they write. So I don't know, like when you bring up different artists like Majid, I don't even know who, and Rashid, I don't know what. Sorry, no disrespect to those people. I don't know, in my wheelhouse of music, accoutrement, I don't listen to them, so I wouldn't have much of an idea to speak on from that, because people do talk about things in society, social, cultural, political, they all do, and I don't think that music is an exception to that rule. There are people, they haven't been found, the ones that you're speaking about.
Yeah, and they're not being pushed in the media.
They're not, but I mean, I don't know if you saw in the media recently, there was Nemesis. She's an artist. She's Palestinian, I believe. And she was being interviewed and they were asking her questions that were really, problematic just in nature.
Very random, sorry.
Yeah.
Who was that artist that had a track with Narcy? And I think she would wear the Palestinian...
I'm not
the
so
same
sure.
time that I think, was it Alhamdulillah? Narcy dropped his track. I think it was the same time. Was it with Narcy or with Omar Effendim? I forgot her name.
Yes, yeah, I don't know.
And she had a phenomenal voice. But
what, for the track of the TV show? Is that what you're talking about? The sort of entry theme tune?
No, it was
The show Mo. It was like the theme tune for the show Mo. Is that the one that you're talking about?
I don't think so. She has a very powerful voice, and she would wear the Palestinian
I don't know.
dress. But after that, like, that was a huge hit. But and then probably she has a track with Loki also. Anyways, let's talk about Fire and Silk.
Sure.
Right? So you published your book, Fire and Silk,
I did.
which researched 1,000 half Emiratis.
No.
No?
No, Fire and Silk is a separate project.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Fire and Silk is a fictional story, a love story of an artist kind of moving through the world, figuring out love, romance, friendships, etc. That was something that I published. And then my half Emirati research is something that is in development, which inshallah will be published.
amazing. We'll take both bit by bit.
Sure.
So
which one do you want to go first?
Fire and Silk.
What about it?
But why Fire and Silk?
Why Fire and Silk?
Yeah.
One of the lines in the opening book says, if I was to describe two words about me to describe a love that once spilled out of me in a class that I wasn't meant for, it would be fire and silk, something with more heat and color than substance. So that's the title of the book, Fire and Silk. The reason why I wrote this book is because I think when you go through experiences in life, whether it's a rite of passage, love, loss, relationships, friendships, I believe in allowing that experience to spill out of you in a cathartic way. And for me, it was writing this book. I didn't expect it to come in a form of a book, but it did. Normally I'll paint it, or I'll write a poem about it, or we'll sing about it. I mean, I don't sing about it, but you know what I mean. But this came in a form of a book. And so that's why I wrote it. So it has elements of my own personal experience, this kind of love story, which takes this woman by the name of Jenna, and she goes through ups and downs with friends, family, someone that she loved, and how she navigates her own identity through the realm of society, racial discrimination, through prejudice, through, like I said, love and loss. It's just a cute and short romantic story.
And about the first of all, what did you discover in yourself while writing that book?
So many things, actually. It took me about 2.5 years to write. So it was a really long and strenuous process. I also am severely dyslexic. So a lot of it was written through me speaking audio dictation into a phone or into a laptop using different tools. I actually wrote my dissertation for my master's degree as an audio dictation.
Which I want to get into later. I was like, really? If I knew, I would have done that probably.
You have to get diagnosed, and then you kind of go through this process where they allow you extra time. It's a whole thing. But
we'll get to it.
So I did. I wrote the book, and the process was like bit by bit, it would just come to me. So, it wasn't really chronological. It was like moments and fragments in time. And then I would stitch them in through this kind of, like, how does this point in the chapter fit into this chapter? And it became an almost like mind map. And I had it on the wall, and I was kind of figuring out where something ended and something else began. And that was kind of the process of writing it. And when I learned in the end that there were aspects to the main character that were very unresolved in who she was. And those same elements were so resolved and refined in the other characters. So it showed me as a person that I tend to focus on other people more than I tend to myself. I tend to allow my kindness to be mistaken as weakness. I tend to harbor a lot of emotions personally, even though it's not personal. I tend to really be an extreme feeler. That's
very powerful to be able
to
recognize that.
Yeah.
Like I can, wow, I need to hear that again. So you said that you mistake it, like
Kindness for weakness.
you make people mistake your kindness for weakness. And then you said that you find yourself taking things personally when they're not really personal.
And I
Like,
think
give me an example.
well, I think it stems from childhood. And for me, as a child, didn't have much of a safe space to feel like I could express my emotions and know that they were in a space to be received. Like, a simple situation could be when you're, even at school, you start crying and then someone says, why are you crying? Why are you getting emotional? And so they put the onus and the blame on the child. So the child ends up regulating their own emotions, which means that if I'm in a situation where someone does something which I'm within a vicinity of, I will take it personally as if it's a personal attack on me, even though it has nothing to do with me. And that's because I was framed in many situations when I was younger that like the result of X was because of Y and you are the Y. So indirectly, even if there's something that you didn't do, you had no responsibility for, you have to self-soothe and you have to self-regulate. So you take on that burden. And so I realized that was just a little small fragment of many other strings or branches of a much larger thing that you need to kind of discuss, whether it's through therapy or through friends and whatnot, which is that I tend to put people before myself. So I'm concerned and catering to their needs above my own needs. And because I cater to their needs, it's often at my expense. So that's something that I learned through writing the book, because the characters were so veneered and so refined, like I said, except for the main character, who's the protagonist. Like, why is she so unresolved? Why is it that her reactions are based on someone else's actions? It's almost like I took a step out of this character who's a fictitious character, but was an extension of me. So I was able to divorce myself from her, but yet there were so many similarities that I was like, why is she like that? I'm like, wait, why am I like that? And it becomes this like existential, resolution of sorts. So yeah.
Sounds really exciting. I think I want to read it.
Great, I'll get you a copy. I'm doing if you're dyslexic, I'm doing an audiobook version so you can like listen to it.
Please.
So yeah.
I don't think I am. I don't think I've ever been diagnosed, but
is it easier for you to listen to like audiobooks? Okay.
1,000,000,000%.
All right, so we'll do that. Just give me a bit of time and I'll get it done.
100%, please. All right. I'm really excited also to ask you about the half Emirati research or examining the half Emirati in the society. So what did you discover?
Oh man, there's so many things that I've discovered and I continue to discover. This project of mine has been a passion project for a few years. It's collecting, culling, and synthesizing 1,070 half Emiratis, 948 by way of the father, where the father is Emirati,
okay,
and 122 where the mother is Emirati. So we have both Emiratis that are self-identified in society as Emiratis, and those that are identified as Abna and Muwatanat. Like, I have the two because I opened it to...
Which I think the ratio is pretty accurate. Like, in most cases, it's the father. Here in Emirati, it will be more like the father is Emirati and the mother is...
Yes, and I think that's purely by way of... the patrilineal legacy that we live. Everything is by way of the father. Religion, nationality, last names, we get them all by way of the father. So it makes more sense that there would be more that are by way of the father than there are of the mother. But there are so many things that I had found out through the study. I found that the highest form of half Emiratis within the study that I did is half Emirati, half Filipino, which is really fascinating in terms of the details and the findings. I found that around 80% of the participants were women. So it was anywhere between 70 to 80%, which tells a lot about the way society is fluid with giving personal information. Women are more receptive to that type of experience. This is not to say that that's an isolated like variable, but it's definite. It allows for more flexibility and openness and receptiveness to be able to discuss situations that would be considered maybe a little controversial, maybe a little too highbrow. So women were more receptive. The main demographic was anywhere between the age of 24 to 34, kind of within that range. I had those that were under 18 and those that were above 65. I had two that were above 65 that participated.
So, yeah, these are the offsprings.
The offspring. And what was really interesting is about, I'd say, close to, I think it's about 83 to 87% of the half Emiratis by way of the mother married within the geographical proximity to the UAE. So they've rarely married outside the GCC.
Okay.
And if they did,
regardless of the nationality, but they married somebody who's living here.
Yeah. Oh no, within the region. So it would be, if the mother was Emirati, the father would be Omani, or he would be Qatari, or he would be Kuwaiti, like within the realm of
this is if the mother is Emirati.
Yes.
Okay.
Usually. Whilst with the fathers, it's X, where they're most likely to marry within the outer geographical region to the UAE.
If they'll go out, they'll go really out.
Go the furthest. And it's fascinating because it goes to show the level of pressure is a wrong word, but similar to pressure that women face in keeping the unit of the family close in terms of culture. So if you're a man, let's say you're Emirati, and you marry someone who is British, because everything is by way through the patrilineal legacy, the last name, the religion, the adat and taqalid, if they're here, etc., they tend to gain a little bit of their mum, but mostly of their dad. The last name, even the language most of the time. But what was interesting with the study is
even if the father's not present.
Even if the father's not present.
Okay.
And
maybe that's how they associate themselves.
Yes. And it's interesting that, I didn't go too much into the nuance of somebody's personal upbringing. The only aspect of it was I asked the question of, are your parents together or are they divorced? Also, were they ever married? And this is open to interpretation, but it's also important to take into consideration culture, because if you are a product of an unlawful union, then you don't need to disclose that clearly. You can say that, yes, we are unmarried, and that opens the avenue of we were never married and we are unmarried. So that implies something else, but it doesn't make the participant feel that they are anything less than through social stigmas. So there's questions that you kind of move around in that respect. And also questions of like, is the mother the first wife or the second wife or the third or the fourth? Do you have half siblings, etc. So these are the types of general questions that were asked. But the most interesting aspect of the research was one of the very few open-ended questions, where the question was, did you experience some form of ridicule or some form of exclusion rather than inclusion within the sort of Emirati framework? And because it was open-ended, people could write a paragraph, people could write one word, people could write nothing at all. But the phrasings and the usage of words of people who did experience it in some way, shape or form, because some people were like, no, I lived a great life, never had any issues, never was discriminated against, felt very included, very close with my extended family, etc. But then the ones that didn't feel included, they had the same social slurs, the same stereotypes, the same form of name calling against their other counterparts, which was really, really curious and really interesting.
And this is like from not being included from their own family, or let's say extended family, or from the society, in terms of maybe from school or from, whenever they're just in the society.
So because I'm still in the process of culling through the information, and inshallah, fingers crossed, when this research gets published, I created classification systems. I had, like, if you're going to get an open-ended question where everyone is writing whatever they want to write and you don't have a system or a structure or a framework to depart from, it becomes very difficult to categorize and create order in what people say. So for me, the classification system was about 5 or 6. You had the utterance cluster, which was known where stereotyping, name calling, and forms of like the mother or the father, or what I like to call like bint el whatever or wild el whatever, because that was one of the main kind of forms of stereotypes. So it was very frequent, the utterance cluster. Then you had the education cluster, which was, or the institutional cluster, which is like the institution of marriage, the family institution, the educational institution, the work, employment institution. Where did this discrimination come from? Which school of thought was it in? So that's one cluster. Another cluster is the language cluster, which was really big. It was it because of your accent? Was it the dialect? Was it the lack of Arabic spoken? Was it, there were so many different aspects, and there were, because these clusters were not me sort of imprinting onto the data being like, well, I think I'm going to put it here and there. This was what the evidence was presenting. There was a huge correlation and a massive sample of people that were discriminated against via lack of Arabic proficiency. Or lack of awareness to using Arabic as a dialect, or the accent. Or
but I mean, I feel like even if your accent is spot on, whether, because this issue also happens in Oman, it's the same case, and I believe the whole Khalij will be very similar in that aspect. I think even if you get the accent spot on, if you don't look like the rest, you're gonna get the wildil whatever, you know, whatever is your mom's nationality or whatever you look like. If you look more Asian, they'll give you, you know.
And that is a very real variable, and that was a result for some of them, not all of them, but yes, that was it. And so when we said utterance cluster, language cluster, institutional cluster, and then there was, of course, the physical features cluster, which was how have you been discriminated against because of your phenotypical differences? Are you, some said that they were discriminated because of their skin color, from the way that they look, their eye color, so there were so many different clusters, and I would see where they would correlate and overlap, and where there are similarities, like if there was an institutional cluster mentioned in the example, was that also mentioned in the utterance? And if it was, what was the social slur that was used? Because I cannot even begin to tell you how many of them experienced being called the daughter of kada kada kada, or the son of kada kada kada. So
I mean, I've got it in school.
But isn't it fascinating? It's fascinating that what I noticed, especially when it came by way of the father, the successes were attributed to the father. The failures were attributed to the mother. So the father would be, you know, your bint whatever, like let's just say your dad is, I don't know, his name is Muhammad or something, you know, you'd be like, oh yeah, طبعا bint Muhammad did this and that and well done her. But then if her mother, who was, let's say, English or French, it'll be like, you know, bint al-ajnabiyya or bint al-Britaniyya, because they need to find a way to justify the behavior of this individual.
Which I think is not specific for our region. I think all humans are like that. If tomorrow I am Japanese mixed with Nigerian and I have different features, then in school I'm going to expect to get different slurs because I look different, and because I am different, it's supposed to be that if you're the same, then you are better. If you are pure, then you are better. If you're mixed, then you're diluted and you're less.
But then it goes to the question, well, what is pure? Because we can we can have that conversation.
Who's pure? Like,
but
if
I
you
mean,
start
that's
from
a wider question to ask about purity. But even when you were speaking about the sort of Nigerian or Japanese, the Japanese actually have a term for that. It's called hafu. They call people who are half whatever, hafu.
Okay.
And it's part of my research as like an annotation or whatnot. And they've experienced the same.
So I think
forms of
humans have
discrimination.
this racism everywhere. Bob Marley had it because he wasn't pure black because his dad was white. So he wasn't considered black enough because it was a light-skinned brother, you know. And if he would go into a society of all whites, he wouldn't be considered white enough. He'd be considered, you know, an African. And I think this applies everywhere. Of course, our religion completely is against it. Alhamdulillah, our laws are against it. If it ever gets to the government, then they do take action. But how often does that happen? Obviously, it will be, you know, by the time it gets to the law, you already ate like so much of that slurs.
Yeah. But I also think it's important to recognize that there's nothing wrong with having this spectrum, because especially if you are talking about a community like here, where there is such a separation between the, let's say, local community versus the non-local community. When you have people who are byproducts of literally the mixture, then at some point in time, their marginalization or their underrepresentation will be considered another viewpoint to look and navigate the way that this place is functioning. And I think that that's why at least for me, the research was so important, because there is a scholarly gap in the literature. Forget having a gap with locals and non-locals. There is a gap in understanding the nuances and complexity of mixed race identity and what that brings to the table, not just here, but in the region. And when it is discussed, there are so many Western tropes that get put into the mix to dilute what the actual content is trying to speak on, or what the data set is trying to speak on. And so I made the conscious decision that while writing this is going to be written as an integration of like prose and personal anecdotes, as well as academic and scholarly writing, without the need of Western validation or needing the West as a framework to depart from. So this was a very conscious effort, because a lot of the people that I did speak to, whether they were academics and whatnot, their constant, I guess, argument, they say with me when we do have this conversation, is like, where is the literature framework? Where is the belly of the literature that we can understand this? I'm like, there is none. And there really isn't. Like, I'm not making a gross exaggeration of this. There is maybe 1 or 2 papers that I've come across that really speak to this experience. And then they reference things that exist outside of the Arab or Khaliji or like Arab bubble in general. So why do we need that as the foundation? Are you saying that it's not enough to be on its own? That it needs to have this cushion in order to be considered valid or warranted or good enough to be like digested and interpreted? I say no. I say it is good enough and we don't need that validation. So that's kind of, I guess, the main crux of why, at least for me, this research is so important to be published. And, you know, inshallah, in the next, you know, couple of months to a year, it might get that. So yeah.
Inshallah, may Allah bless that work. Why is it that topics which fall under the umbrella of the imaginary, you know, interest you? Like, first of all, for us that don't understand it, what is the imaginary or social imaginary, all of that jazz?
It's interesting you should say that. I had an exhibition that I called Subtracting the Imaginary. And there is a book by Benedict Anderson, which talks about imagined communities. And so the word imaginary is the understanding of the lack of definition, that something is not refined or defined enough to exist as its sole kind of
entity.
Exactly, a sole entity. So when you speak on something that is still yet to be ambiguous or to be obscure, it is considered an imaginary. So you could talk about, you know, the Afro-Arab imaginary or whatnot. You could always add the imaginary because you are allowing for the complexities and the nuances of that subject matter to be open for interpretation. So when I talk about the Arab imaginary or even the Emirati imaginary, this is not to say that Emiratis is an imaginary concept. No, it's that it is open and willing to be receptive for change and for growth and for development in and of itself. And I think that when you use this term, you are allowing the audience or the people that are aware of it to be willing to digest that this topic will forever be in constant cyclical change, and that you are not the person that it will define it and create it to be what it is, and you are also not the person to dismantle it. You are just the midpoint that is like, here we go, here's the information, have with it what you will. And I think that a lot of the conversations that surround identity, whether it's Emirati identity, whether it's Saudi identity, whether it's whatever, there is always this fearful like clutching at the pearls where you're like, no, but this is the way we should be, this is the way we should act, this is the way that we should speak. You're not leaving room for this margin of error. And not to say that like, it's an error, but like this room for negotiation, this room for knowing that like you are not one thing, you are the sum of many parts. And I think that's what the imaginary is about.
I mean, I like what I just came back from Jeddah less than a week ago, and it was my first time in Saudi. And what I noticed there, they have the sense of pride that they're mixed, that they're diverse, you know, and I think that's beautiful. Instead of this sense of whenever we're mixed, we're not pure, that means we should try and hush that part. No, brother, the more exposure, we're better together, you know? You have, what is better, to have one perspective or multiple, and then you come up with your decision. It's always the collective. So I'm saying this because I really want us as a nation to have a broader way of seeing things, you know, instead of this narrow-minded, racist damn perspective.
And that's valid, and I completely understand where you're coming from, and I agree with it to a certain extent, because when you think of something like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it is massive. The vast majority of the people that are there are like Saudiyin. But when you talk about other countries that are smaller in scale, they are often, if not often at times, a minority in their own country. So they function and they navigate or traverse identity in a very different way. And for them, it's about cementing a very clear understanding of what it is versus what it isn't. And the people that understand it for what it is, you will not deviate or deflect from that, because in order to cement something and to ensure longevity of that, you have to keep drilling in that specific narrative over and over again until it becomes the norm. And I can't remember who said this, but it's like when you create, let's say, an understanding in your mind, you have to continue to do that before it becomes like a routine. And when that routine is practice, it becomes a pattern. And when that pattern is practice, it becomes a form of, you know, a reliance, a consistent way of understanding something. And then when that becomes consistent, it becomes a fact. And when that fact it becomes embedded in the fabric of who you are. So when you have that repetition constantly going and going, eventually 5 years, 15 years, 20, 30, 50 years from now, 150 years from now, there is a very clear and concise understanding of who you are and what you represent. And I think that is why a lot of nations that are smaller in scale, with a smaller population sum, with being somewhat of a minority in their own space, struggle with in relation to something like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
On a larger scale, right? I mean, different factors contribute into forming the mindset of a society, whether it be the social institutions, media, cultural norms and values, art. For us, on a larger scale, how would you describe, how would you rate our work ethic?
But in which avenue? You have to be more specific.
How do we look at quality of work?
It depends on, like I said, which avenue. If you're talking about within a region or within a community, there are so many variables that contribute to the way that we understand work ethic. You can have ease of work that comes into the conversation. You can have nepotism that comes into the conversation. You can have a lack of meritocracy that comes into the conversation. So it really just depends on which avenue. In general,
I feel in general we don't appreciate quality of work.
Well, like I said, it depends. If we say in certain arenas where you can have quality of work over quantity, or you can have quality over work over nepotism, it can be so many different ways. But if you're talking about a very specific avenue, there are reasons put in place for why they function the way that they do. And it can be bureaucracy, it can be nepotism, it can be a lack of meritocracy, it can be so many of those things. But I think generally speaking, when there is motivation and privilege that are alongside each other, that tends to lean towards a lack of needingness to put in that extra work in it, because you are not allotted the space to need to do that.
Yeah.
Like, you are already cushioned within your space.
Yeah.
You don't need to. So it really just depends. I don't know how it works in other fields, but yeah.
I want to make it clear, yes, we do have high performers in the society. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the masses, right?
But isn't that the case for everywhere?
Which is...
I feel like that's the case for everywhere. Like, I feel like in most places, when people would rather do something that is easy
if it
and convenient.
Yeah.
People go for convenience.
If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? But there's some nations that are known for their work ethic, whether it be the Japanese, whether it be the Germans, the German quality, or... I would love that to be our reputation, right? I would read it. I don't see us any less, right? So I think that goes down to our priorities, and how I think one way of seeing our priorities is seeing what we express, let's say whether on the media. And we're humans. Humans get influenced by whatever they get exposed to. And right now I feel like instead of us being driven to have the nice house, to have the nice car, which is nothing wrong with that, but I would rather that being a byproduct of us. I want to be the best at whatever craft it is interests me, and I see I could make an impact out of. And then as a byproduct, I can make a lot of money. I'm completely fine with that. But I want us to be driven with that. And you would see it in the West, they do a lot of movies pushing a movie about, I don't know, baseball, a movie about ballet, a movie about, and giving you examples about how a person can be passionate about one thing and working towards it and going through obstacles and challenges, and then succeeding at it and successful story, blah, blah, blah. And that's injecting these values.
You don't think that exists here?
I said the high performers, but the masses, no. They're driven, which to a certain extent, it does exist that, around the world, the average people are average, right? And they want average stuff. I'm trying to increase because there's some people, it's in them. You just need to switch it on or expose them to it, yeah, you know what? I might want that, you know? But if you just expose to me the nice car or the nice house, then this is what I'm going to be driven about. If you're going to only expose to me music that is just about love, then you know what? I'll just be thinking about that love. Then, like,
no, I would have to disagree, because I think that every community has its highs and lows, its pitfalls and, you know, successes and whatnot. I think for places generally in the West, they are driven to be below average in most cases. They just have a lot of, let's say, formulas and frameworks put in place to allow you to see a very specific curated image. I mean, a vast majority of, you know, Americans can't even locate America on a map. Most of them work below the poverty line. Like and that's not like, you know, what's it, like 65% of them believe in aliens. Like it's a real thing to think about, that we look to them as.
Is that the same case in, let's say, West Europe?
Yes, because you have to bear in mind that the global South, as the global South, enlightenment, language, understanding, tolerance, knowledge in Baghdad, in Damascus, in all of these different places that came up with this like renaissance of sorts. We were the starting point of this. The numerical system did not come from the West, it came from us. The understanding towards the stars and the astrological alignments of the planetary alignments did not come from them, it came from us. So
absolutely. I feel from our side, our story right now and our situation is that tough situations create strong men create, you know, comfortable conditions, and comfortable conditions create soft nations, and now we are the soft nation.
I just
and
don't
that and
agree
this
with
is
that.
and this is a cycle not of the Arabs. This is a cycle of humanity.
I agree to a certain degree, but I don't agree with that statement, because I think that once again we are using the West as a benchmark of what is considered like high performance, high achievement. You were saying in societies they glorify, whether it's in the media, to, you know,
Sure.
say someone's got a baseball, whatever. They are very good at creating a falsified image of what they want you to see. It's not necessarily the reality of the situation. Most people, I mean, I remember when I was doing my undergrad, I was studying in Italy, and a vast majority of the people that came were from the States. They did not have a passport. They got a passport to come to Italy, where I was studying. They only had a social security number. Like, that's all they needed. So this like fantasia that we've experienced, where the West all of a sudden has all of this power and has garnered this ability to like self-actualize and self-proclaim itself as this like be-all and like this be-all
Okay.
of what we know.
Forget about the West. Whether there are so many nations that, let's say,
Give me an example.
Whether if you go to Japan,
Okay.
right? Who respects order more? And then when I say order, I don't mean
But
hierarchy.
that's cultural. That's a cultural thing. So
Yeah,
you have
which is supposed to be that also part of our culture, to respect. Let's say if there's a queue, that I don't come and cut the queue.
well,
Or if we're driving, I don't come and cut the lane, right? This exists in other nations that I would love that we do that.
But I think all societies and all cultures are on a spectrum of whether they are high context cultures or low context cultures. High context cultures, we have the Europe or the West generally. The more far east you go, the lower the context gets, meaning that in somewhere like Europe, you are more assertive, you're more go-getting, you say what you mean and you mean what you say, you don't beat around the bush, you're very direct in what you say. Whilst if you go way out into the other end of the spectrum, which is our nation, and actually Japan as well, because it's far east, is that we don't really say what we mean and mean what we say. We are more we're more implicit than we are explicit. We would rather foster long-term relationships and ensure an understanding and reciprocity when it comes to the way that we deal with things. So in our areas, we're very accommodating. We're very hospitable.
Yeah.
We allow,
which is a beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing, but it has its pitfalls, and it's both a negative and a positive. If you're very hospitable and you're very caring and giving, you will often realign yourself to cater to somebody else's needs and expectations. Or you will reorient yourself in order to allow them to supersede you, so that they end up becoming the priority in a conversation or a circumstance, and you end up having to like resist or like not, be forthcoming in the way that you truly feel. Even if someone disrespects you, it's like, ma'ale, it's fine, it is what it is. I will condition and cushion your fall at my expense. And that's always the case. So with someone like Japan, because of their insular culture, remember, like Japan is very regimented, very disciplined, very non-conforming. They are anti-conformist in their right. They're like, if you don't speak Japanese, that's a you problem. Whilst if you think of this region, very open, very welcoming, very receptive to that. So it's like, if you don't speak like Japanese or you don't speak Arabic, it's fine. We'll speak English. But that has to do with culture. I don't think it has to do with people's inability to see it. I think people do see it. And over time, we hope and pray that it's not going to be to our detriment to such a degree. But, I think we have our positives, but we also have our negatives. But the positives is what makes places within our region such great nations, because we're good talkers. We can make friends. We can, like, I scratch your back if you scratch mine. Like, there is a finessing that takes place. It's like a cultural finessing. And then that, because as Arabs, we were very much like this, like, we will help you and we will be there once, twice, thrice over. But if it goes further, where you start to abuse your privilege, khalas.
I mean, I agree with everything you say in that sense. I'm just looking for rooms for improvement.
I agree with you. Look, there's always a room for improvement, but I think it's easier said than done. And I think people generally, when you're talking about humanity, this is not in the Arab world, I mean, generally speaking, people are very self-serving. People are quite selfish. We are leading a very narcissistic time, especially with social media. We want constant, instant gratification. We don't care for nuance. We don't care for the implications of something. We are so quick to cancel, so quick to decide. Everything is in black and white. And because of the way that society is moving, in all societies, it creates people that are disinterested in looking at their failures and wanting to course correct in order to elevate their consciousness. They have no desire to. We can stay in the 3D realm, in this blueprint, and we are fine. We are peachy.
But I think
elevation is, accountability.
I think I don't think there's an interest, because you have to be interested in improving or being. Yeah,
but why would you? Give me a reason. Why would you improve?
Being open to it would only come out of interest. Like if you actually you find this is a good way of creating conversation, then let's maintain our problems so we can always have stuff to whine about.
Don't you think that consciousness and that awareness to self-improve came through COVID, because we were forced in these conditions to sit there and self-reflect and to post-rationalize?
Did everybody?
Not everybody.
Have this?
But that goes to show you that, like, with that one experience where you had 2 years where you were locked and loaded, self-reflecting, in times to really think deeply and critically about who you are as a person, that existential crisis didn't happen to you, then my friend, you are so far gone down the rabbit hole that maybe there is no light at the end of the tunnel for you.
Yeah.
But I think the people that did improve and the people that did grow and they did become open and receptive to this type of change, they changed their lives 180. Like, they really did a full-blown transformation. They became a new evolved Pokemon. Like, it was like a thing. But I think that now, because we're like, what, 5 years out? When was it? 2019, 20, 21, 22, 24? Yeah,
4.5.
4.5 years. We're at a cycle where eventually we're going to come back around. And this happens every couple of years, where we go through these waves where something becomes so intrinsically deep and profound, and then we lose sight of that. And then we come back to that like profound nature. That's just the way of life. You see it in politics, you see it in culture. There's always this cycle. What is up, so below. What is with, so without.
As an artist here in the Middle East, comparing, let's say, to Europe, how do you feel? Is there any difference?
It depends.
Being an artist here or being an artist there? Like
both. I think that art is a form of self-expression. And I think you as an artist become socially responsible to communicate through your artistic practice in whatever you see fit and what you find interesting. I think in Europe, there is a drive for artists to express themselves against the current social climate. So they will express in the surrounding context. And I think artists in the Middle East are starting to do that. But given the world's devastating circumstances that we are witnessing, a lot of artists, Western artists in Europe, stayed silent. So I think it's selective. You curate it in accordance to what suits and caters your needs. I know many, many artists that were loud and proud and vocal about so many social issues. And the second they faced certain circumstances here, dead silent, wouldn't say anything. And so you start to realize that, yes, art is a form of expression, but when you are catering to such a level of selfishness, for what? For validation? What are you doing it for?
I mean, I feel it doesn't sometimes have to be you go to the other extreme where you're straight attacking, let's say, the government or, going against it or whatever. But you can still express a topic and address it in a way that is not attacking, but you're saying it politely. This is wrong, and or this is a way that I feel we can do good.
If you operate authentically, only if you come from a position of authentic and genuine rapport. And what I found with a lot of friends of mine who maybe are no longer friends as artists, they are operating from a disingenuous and inauthentic place. So when it came to conversations about what was happening in the region or situations that were so deplorable, so horrific, so painful, that my pain is not your pain, that my worries are not your worries, that my experiences have no effect on your life, that you stay silent, to me, that lack of self-awareness, that lack of social responsibility, that lack of humanity, to me is inexcusable. There's no excuse. As artists, we have that social responsibility, because if we do not communicate through our art practice, what are we doing it for? What are we doing for? For notoriety, for validation, for self-aggrandizement? What is it for? And you can be an artist that it goes one of two paradigms. You either create work that speaks to your truth so that people can have it disseminated and understood, or you make art for other people. You don't make it for yourself. And it's one of two. And for me personally, within my art practice, I keep my art practice almost anti-conceptual. It's like I do landscapes, I do systematic process of painting, because that's how I express myself in art practice. In other realms of my creative practice, that's where I'm vocal. So I don't use art as like a bandwagon or like piggybacking on something else to express, because that's not how I express as an artist in that realm. But you best believe in other things, I will express myself and use other forms, whether it's a podcast, whether it's writing, whether it's whatnot. But the artists that don't do that, sorry, you're no friend of mine.
Sorry, I think we got this. Time went so fast.
Oh, is it done already?
I'm gonna have to get you back on the show.
Sure, yeah.
We didn't ask you the question of the show. There's a lot of things I didn't ask you, and I would like to ask you.
Yeah, sure.
Of course, about your art. I saw you scraping, peeling,
That's
digging,
what I do, little scrapey scrapes.
Hammering. I saw some tools, hammers,
Yeah,
threads.
Yeah.
Maybe a chainsaw.
Yeah, like there's a manual router, a dermal pen, scrapey scrapes.
What exactly are you doing, sir?
Yeah, it's the process of excavation, darling. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of topics to talk about
sure.
in the next round.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.